Welcome back to Let's Have It Out. My guest tonight is University South Africa CEO, Prof. Ahmed Bawa. We were actually just discussing availing resources for the project of decolonization, and you were telling us a bit about that.
So I think the way to secure the project is for the universities and to understand that the way to address the issue of transformation and decolonization is really to kind of engage the knowledge project itself. Now, what I was saying a little bit earlier about how universities have lost their publics was really to say that there's a need for the universities to re-establish a serious level of engagement with the post-1994 South Africa, which hasn't happened yet. And it's something that I think that we have to work towards. Now, why the engagement? It's very simple. And it's simply so that the universities begin to be representative of the society that they exist in. They are social institutions. They should be representative of the societies that they engage in, that they exist in. And the only way to do that really is through their knowledge project, through their teaching and learning, and through their research, to have a really serious level of engagement. By the way, it's not just with communities and not just with the NGO sector and so on, but also with industry and business and so on. So it's looking at developing much stronger linkages with society in all its forms.
Mm-hmm. We're now joined in the conversation by the chairperson for the Higher Education Transformation Network, Dr. Reginald Lechwabe, who is actually on the line. Good evening, Dr. Lechwabe. Thank you for joining us. Yes, thank you. So I'm going to introduce a new topic, or not a new topic, but a new element to the topic. And then I think, Prof. Bawa, after that, you can also give some content there. For us, we also need to talk about this dichotomy, right, between historically advantaged and historically disadvantaged institutions. We have a huge focus on historically advantaged institutions like WITS and UCT and UP, but what are we actually doing to transform historically disadvantaged institutions who, arguably actually need it more than most?
Thanks very much once more.
Prof, we're having some difficulty hearing you.
I want you, from that perspective, would necessarily be that it is about ensure that the resources are correctly allocated and that the number of staff. And by then, I also not just the labor party, the sector are issues such as.
We're having some difficulty hearing Dr. Lechwabe. We'll try and get him back on the line. But let me then pose that question to you, Prof, around what are we doing about historically disadvantaged institutions?
No, I think one of the really big challenges we face is that 24 years after change. I'm
24 years old, by the way.
We still have historically white and historically black universities. And this is just not tenable, So I think that there are two aspects to this. The one is to say, can we begin, through structured funding from the state, using the subsidy system and so on, to begin to ensure that the universities, historically black universities, become much more kind of geared for the role that they have to play.
But does University South Africa look at the fact that historically disadvantaged institutions are not at the forefront? Perhaps what we need is a concerted effort to say that instead of focusing so much on institutions who, inverted commas, have the resources, perhaps what we genuinely need to do is take that leap and say, well, actually, what we're going to do is focus on your TUTs, on your VUTs, on your UniVens, etc.
Yeah. No, I think that is very much a part of our agenda, that actually in every argument and discussion that we have with the department, this is very much on the agenda. The challenge, of course, is that what you don't want to do is to weaken the research institutions too, to the extent that they become non-competitive, if you like. So there's a bit of tension there. But on the other hand, there's a universal recognition across the system that we have to deal with the issue of the poverty of the historically black universities. But can I just continue this a little bit? Because one of the things that we've failed at terribly over the last 24 years is to build really serious connections between the historically white and historically black universities, and to get them to co-teach, co-research, and so on. And that's something that's very much on our agenda now.
And I think that's actually a fundamental point. Prof, you spoke about being competitive. And that's actually one of the things I wanted to discuss. You know, when we talk about decolonization, like I keep saying, it's not just about the curriculum. You know, we talk about these Western universities in Europe and the USA and North America, and those are the standards of what quality is, of what great universities are. Are we perhaps missing the point? Are we not actually, why are we not redefining what quality and what greatness is? Why are we not looking within the continent to do that?
Look, the issue of the rankings and so on is a very...
it's a very subjective term.
It's very subjective, and it's very contentious, by the way. So I, for one, don't agree that we should be sort of in the rankings race, if you like. But of course, there are others who feel that that's very important. I think the important issue is not so much about whether we compare ourselves with the historically, you know, with the kind of the universities of the metropoles and so on. The important thing really is to try to understand how our universities can be optimized to serve our needs. And of course, what that does mean, unfortunately, is that we have to be a part of this global economy. So, you know, it would be foolish for us to say, look, let's, for the next 10 years, let's stop doing any work on the fourth industrial revolution or whatever. We could, you know, that would be a ridiculous
But surely there's some balance that can be struck. I think that those who are advocating for decolonization, we're definitely not saying let's completely forget what we're there for.
Yes.
I think it's in realizing this fourth industrial revolution that at the same time of doing that, we're also empowering ourselves as young black Africans.
Correct.
So when we talk about this idea of, you know, African solutions to African problems, some people have issues with how that's phrased, but the fact is us coming up with innovation and it coming from within the continent to actually then compete, like you say, on the question of the fourth industrial revolution. Just one question that's linked to this. You know, as a student and as someone who's also tried to be in the workforce, we also need to rethink this education system. You know, not just in terms of accessibility, which is, of course, fundamental. It's what Fees Must Fall and Roads Must Fall is about in some ways, but also in terms of relevance, in terms of the skills we're giving to young people. Are we preparing people for the workforce? Are we preparing them for the economy? Because decolonization is also about that. It's about saying, are we looking and teaching what's actually relevant to young people?
So I have a slightly contentious view about this, right? And the contentious view is that I think we do quite well. You know, if one assumes that of the graduates that our university systems produce, we have an unemployment rate of 6%. That's an indication, in fact, that we do relatively well. Having said that, you know, when I was Vice Chancellor at DUT and I spoke to employers, and I did it regularly, what I heard recurringly was not that students were not being trained and were not being technically excellent at what they were doing and so on, that the engineers were fine and the health scientists were fine and so on. The big challenge was students were not, comparably working well at producing reports, being critical in their approaches and so on. Now, many universities are thinking very hard about how to inculcate into the academic enterprise, building these softer skills, if you like, these skills that make people much more effective in the workplace. So, for example, I mean, I can again just go back to the Durban University of Technology. 30% of the curriculum at DUT now is what we call general education. It's where students are really forced to engage with these skills that make them much more effective in the workplace.
Yeah.
So, I think that each university will have its own approach to that, but it's a fair question. It's an important question, I think.
So we need to now move to an ad break. We'll take more of your questions and comments after the break. Don't go away.